Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are on the East Coast and at an undisclosed location within Central Virginia, East Coast time. So, good morning to the Gregory Wright Show. The only thing that I can comprehend is that the narrative surrounding the ICE raids across the nation, specifically in Minnesota and even more specifically in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, is being misinterpreted, misreported throughout all new mainstream media news channels. And the fact of the matter is that ICE, the Customs Enforcement Agency, Immigrant Custom Enforcement Agency, right? That's part of Department of Homeland Security, DHS, a federal agency. Their job is to get the worst of the worst criminals off the streets of across the United States, especially Minnesota and especially Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. These guys are the worst of the worst. And I'm going to click to you and I'm going to show you what I mean. It's Monday morning, 19 January 2026. Words are not easy to come by when describing ICE detainees in Minnesota and across the United States, but I am here as the host of the Gregory Wright Show to bring it all to you. And based on recent DHS and ICE reports from Operation Metro Surge, which began in late 2025 and has resulted in over 2,000 arrests in the Minneapolis area, the worst of the worst refers to undocumented immigrants, meaning illegal aliens with severe criminal histories, including murder, child sexual assault, gang affiliations, and other violent offenses. As of January 2026, this month, at least 1,500 arrests have been made, with highlights focusing on individuals previously released due to local sanctuary policies. Among these, 13 are confirmed gang members from groups like MS-13, Paellas, and Oriental Boys. Below are detailed summaries of some of the most egregious cases drawn from official statements and media coverage, along with available mugshots or related images. So here we got this Vietnam guy. His name is Hien Quoc Thai from Vietnam, convicted of murder. Look at the mugshot right here. These are the criminals that were getting off the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota. But you have these purple haired protesters out on the streets blowing whistles, honking horns, and alerting all the other vicious and egregious criminals that ICE is in the area so they can have a chance to escape, which is, in my definition and law enforcement definition of immigrant enforcement operation impediment. But this guy right here, he ain't Quoc Thai, convicted of murder, period, right? Arrested as a high priority target during the surge for violent crimes. DHS described him as one of the worst with a history that includes ignoring deportation orders. Why would he feel emboldened to ignore deportation orders? It is a sentiment that is sewn into the fabric of half of the country in the United States. Half of the population believe that this guy should be free to walk among hardworking taxpayer citizens across the nation, especially in Minnesota and more specifically Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Here's another one. Um, I, this picture may be not accurate right here, but there's a Sridon Pavian. He's a Laos guy, right? From Laos, convicted of strong arm sodomy of children, aggravated assault, sexual offenses, child rape, burglary, fraud, vehicle theft. They don't have his picture up here. These are just pictures of ICE agents here, but maybe that's intentional misinformation, disinformation. This guy right here, standing, looking towards the camera. His name is Tao Vang, also from Laos. This guy right here, convicted of sexual assault and sodomy of a girl under 13, as well as procuring a child for prostitution. Deportation order in place since 2006, targeted for child sex offenses as part of ICE's focus on convicted killers and rapists. So when you see green haired white female feminists with bull nose rings and whistles and acting erratically, these are the people that they're protesting for. These are the people that those protesters in Minneapolis, St. Paul are standing up for, that committed egregious acts. Here's another one from El Salvador. A face only a mother can love. Convicted of 3 homicides, deportation order since 2025, highlighted for multiple murder convictions and DHS releases. You got the Somali, right? Uh, Abdurrashid Adosh Elmi from Somalia, convicted of homicide, part of ICE's publicized list of arrested murderers in the sanctuary state of Minnesota. Brian Ainjon, Marshall Island. I never even heard of the place, but he has 24 convictions, including assault, causing bodily injury, domestic abuse, public nudity, theft, interference with official acts, public intoxication, and trespassing. DHS emphasized his extensive criminal record as an example of repeat offenders. Then you got this other guy, he's from El Salvador, Jose Alejandro Alvarado, convicted of sexual assault on a child, right? This old guy right here, arrested for sex crimes against minors in the Minneapolis area, right? There's no picture here, but you got Noor Ibrahim, no picture, but DHS has him on record for registered sex offender with 17 convictions, including larceny, vehicle theft, receiving stolen property, forgery, domestic violence, terroristic threats, DUI, intimidation, escape from custody, and property damage. Noted for his long history as a convicted sex offender. These criminals that committed egregious acts are what the protesters are protesting about. They are protesting on behalf of these criminals that committed heinous crimes. But the protesters want them to walk free within the state of Minnesota. I got some more. Hernan Cortez Valencia from Mexico, convicted of sexual assault, and DUI. Deportation order since 2016, targeted specifically for child sex crimes. Get a good look at this picture, right? So I know I'm 12 minutes into the video, but as the video description suggests, I am here to provide a reaction to Bernie Sanders, this guy named Ari Velshi from CNN, and what Fetterman had to say about this whole deal. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. And so you have this ICE agent. Before I get into that, You have this ICE agent that's basically a brown guy, right? He doesn't look Caucasian. He doesn't look black. He is a Hispanic brown guy. I don't know what country he's from.
So you're reporting, we're here to arrest a child sex offender. And you guys are out here honking.
Oh, they're not. No, we're press. We're not.
That vehicle right there is honking and impeding our investigations while we're trying to arrest a child sex offender. That's who you guys are protecting. Insane.
Insane. I couldn't have said it better, right? That's a perfect lead in to this idiot right here, Bernie Sanders, who should know better. Bernie Sanders should know better. This guy got railroaded by his own party because back in 2016, when he was a Democratic candidate during the Democratic primary for the 2016 presidential election, the Democratic establishment wanted Hillary Clinton to be the front runner, but the American people chose Bernie Sanders as the front runner. You could do the research on any AI tool dating back to 2016 that Bernie Sanders had a sizable lead uh, over Hillary Clinton in the overall nomination pick to run against Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential election. But what did they do? What did the Democratic establishment do? And let's be clear, the Democratic establishment is the Obama family, it's the Clinton family, it's the Democratic donors who have millions, if not billions, of dollars donated to the Democratic National Committee to prop up Democratic candidates for various positions, but most specifically for the presidential primary nomination to be the front runner to run against Trump during those years. And much like what happened to President Biden and Harris, the Democratic establishment forced out Bernie Sanders, who was the clear front runner for the Democratic Party, and installed Hillary Clinton, which who lost against President Trump during that presidential election in 2016. And so what happened to Biden, the same thing happened to Biden. Obama and the Clintons forced President Biden out of the 2024 presidential race against Donald Trump and installed Kamala Harris, and she lost. And so Bernie Sanders should know better than to come out with this nonsense, because people like me and people like all of you and my listeners, we understand what's going on. And so, without saying too much more, let's see what he has to say.
Thanks very much for joining me. I wish I could cheer you up, but I can't. This is an unprecedented and dangerous moment in modern American history under a president who is increasingly unhinged and every day is moving us toward an authoritarian society with more and more power resting in his own hands. While the situation is frightening, I am absolutely confident that if we stand together and not let Trump and his friends divide us up, we can and will prevail. And the good news is that even more and more Republicans are understanding the folly of standing with Trump on both policy and political issues, as polls indicate that he is becoming more and more unpopular. Let's give Donald Trump credit for being straightforward. Last week, in an interview with the New York Times, when asked about what he considers to be the limits on his own power in terms of international affairs, he said, quote, "Yeah, there is one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me. I don't need international law, end quote. Trump says he doesn't need international law. And as a result, Trump believes he has the right to attack Venezuela without congressional approval, the right to threaten to go to war against Denmark, a long-standing NATO ally, in order to take over Greenland, and to threaten Mexico, Colombia, and even Canada. In other words, Trump is right. He has no respect for international law, which means that no other country on earth will have respect for international law. As a result, we will move to international anarchy, where any act of violence, for whatever reason that any country or terrorist group thinks is acceptable, will be done. And that is a horrific situation. But it is not just his disregard for international law. It is his contempt for the Constitution of the United States and for the rule of law here at home. He has continued to illegally rescind money that Congress has appropriated for everything from education to climate change. He has denied funding to states that committed the crime of voting against him in an election. He has attacked federal courts and ignored court orders. He has sent FBI agents into a Washington Post reporter's home. He has attacked media, which has not bent the knee toward him. He has withheld funding from universities whose curriculum he disagrees with. He is renaming federal buildings after himself. He is investigating his political opponents, including the conservative chairman of the Federal Reserve, multiple United States senators, and the Attorney General of the state of New York. And he is pressuring states to redraw congressional maps so that his favored candidates win.
Here's a hot take. If you have a message inside you that people are meant to hear, it'll never make the impact that it truly deserves until you have one thing,
Donald Trump does not disagree with his opponents. He is attempting to destroy his opponents. In other words, plain and simple, when you add all of this up and more, Trump is undermining the foundations of American democracy and everything this country has stood for since its inception. And as bad as all of that is, we now have the situation in Minneapolis. An unarmed American citizen, Renee Good, was shot in the head by an ICE officer in broad daylight. Instead of demanding accountability for her killing, the Trump administration's first instinct was to lie, describing her as a domestic terrorist and offering the officer absolute immunity. This, by the way, as you may recall, is reminiscent of how the January 6th insurrectionists were redefined by Trump as peaceful protesters and pardoned. In other words, when people are trying to overthrow the government of the United States violently, they are peaceful protesters, they are pardoned. When a woman is sitting in her car and shot in the head, she is a domestic terrorist, and the guy who shoots her is pardoned. Instead of withdrawing ICE from the city of Minneapolis or reducing its presence because of this horrific act, the Trump administration has instead sent thousands more ICE agents into the city. It is now threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow him to bring the United States military into Minneapolis above and beyond the thousands of masked ICE agents.
It's a shit show out there.
In other words, the Trump administration's response to peaceful protest is a military takeover of a major American city. This is not only an outrage unto itself, it sets a precedent for the U.S. military to be deployed domestically against Trump's perceived.
All right, so here's my response to that, right? Here is my response to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders He mentioned unhinged president. Okay, so Trump derangement syndrome on 1,000. He needs help. He needs help because we had weekend at Bernie's President Biden asleep at the wheel for 4 years. Opened up the daggone border, U.S. southern border, to let tens of millions of illegal aliens to invade our U.S. southern border and to suck up the resources that were meant for people that were citizens of this country, like infants, the elderly, and homeless veterans. Instead, went to illegal aliens who were able bodied working people who should have stayed in their country and contributed to their own economy. You had most executive orders signed by an auto pen. Nobody knew who was in charge when President Biden was in the White House. There was cocaine in the White House. Nobody daggone figured that mystery out. There was the 51 intelligence agents that all lied on a signed document saying that the Hunter laptop was Russian misinformation and Russian disinformation. You had trans, you had men who had titties bare their breasts on the White House lawn during you know, a celebration for transgender people or the LGBTQ plus AI, WXYZ, whatever, right? You had a president that was unavailable to the press to ask questions. You had a president who had a red background somewhere in DC speaking illy of half the country who voted for President Trump during 2016, 2020, and 2024, calling them an existential threat to American democracy. You also had a case where I think it was Biden's granddaughter, or I think it was his granddaughter, that had a diary allegedly saying that, hey, this guy grandpa's creepy. You had President Biden on national television telling the world that when Ukrainian investigators were looking into Burisma, that the president of the United States was going to withhold $1 billion from entering into Ukraine unless they stopped the Burisma investigation on what Hunter Biden was doing. He had no skills. He had no oil background. He had no petroleum oil and lubricant background. He had no oil drilling background, but yet he was on the Burisma board overseeing those very things. And then next, uh, Bernie Sanders talks about the polls, right? President Trump and his policies are unpopular. My question is, who were the pollsters polling? If they were all Trump deranged, then of course there's going to be an unpopular opinion about what Trump is doing. We have seen that the polls have been wrong. The polls were wrong in 2016 during the presidential election. The polls indicated that Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton was leading Trump. That wasn't true because Trump won in 2016. And then you have the case in 2020 where the pandemic created a lane for voter corruption, voter interference, mail in ballots, ballot harvesting, stuffing ballot boxes with undated, unsigned ballots, all counted towards President Biden. So the polling is wrong. Anybody who says that Trump's policies are unpopular right now are lying to the American people. We need to go to a more like Rasmussen or Quinnipiac or something that is more a polling apparatus that's more uh, centrist, moderate, and less biased. So I wouldn't believe in the polls. Bernie Sanders says that President Trump invaded Venezuela. I wouldn't call it an invasion. I'll call it a surgical operation to get an illegitimate president who would not relinquish power despite the citizenry in Venezuela who voted for someone else. And this happened twice. This guy Maduro refused to leave power. And so we cannot have that stabilization and destabilization in the region. We can't be shaky in that region because a lot of oil is in that region. China's got their eye on that oil. And what better country to take that Venezuelan oil other than the United States to make sure that our national security interests are secured? By the way, when the United States grabbed Noriega and when Gaddafi was killed, with the United States at the forefront of that, nobody in Congress was crying about we need congressional support before that took place. It's only because it's Trump holding back money from Minnesota and other states that demonstrated that they cannot manage the money coming from the federal government because we have detected fraud in their processes. So the only thing to do is to cut off the federal subsidies to these states that don't have a clue on how to manage their own budget, let alone manage subsidies coming from the federal government. And as long as there's this blatant mismanagement of federal funds, it is within the president's right. It doesn't matter if the money was already allocated by Congress. If there was funding fraud of federal taxpayer dollars by any given state, it could be a red state or a blue state, it doesn't matter. Those funds are going to be held until those states get their act together, and then we'll turn back on the spigot for more federal subsidies. There's no evidence of President Trump ignore or any member of his cabinet ignoring court orders. Every whether you agree with the court orders or not, every court order that has been handed down as it relates to tariffs, as it relates to ICE operations, as it relates to dismantling the Department of Education, as it relates to dismantling USAID. President Trump and his administration has followed all legal court orders. There's no evidence of ignoring court orders. And then um, this guy, Bernie Sanders, wants to bring up the point of political opponents, right? In my